Hello everyone and welcome back to another round of Tuesday Night Legacy. Tonight we've got Food Chain Goblins versus Cephalid Breakfast. On the left you have myself piloting this Goblin food chain list ever since Food Chain was reprinted in the Double Masters back in December of 21. This has been my preferred Goblin list of choice, as well as most of the community. I think mid-range Goblins with the Aether Vial and Rashad Ports is kind of out at the moment, as it's just a little bit too slow for most of this combo meta. This deck actually runs two combos. One is a non-deterministic finish, and the other one does win you the game outright. The normal combo, or the outright combo, is the Conspicuous Snoop with Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. Putting Kiki-Jiki on top of the deck, Conspicuous Snoop gains its activated ability, which allows it to copy that card again and again and again. And then you can use this card right here, Bogart Harbinger, to put the Sling Gang Lieutenant on top of your library, and you can just sacrifice all of your goblins, and that drains your opponent. You win the game that way. And the other combo is with the Food Chain. Instead of having a creature like the Eternal Scourge or the Mist Hollow Griffin that you can constantly sacrifice and cast from exile to gain infinite mana, this deck kind of builds upon itself. Having the Food Chain in play and sacrificing goblins and building up from there. So say you have a Goblin Matron, you're able to play the Goblin Matron, search up a Goblin Ringleader, sacrifice or exile the Goblin Matron for the 4 mana, and that plays into a Goblin Ringleader. That finds you more goblins. And then you continue to go off again and again until you build a big enough board presence, and say you hit a couple of the Muxus Goblin Grandees that allow you to potentially drop up to 6 goblins into play off of one flip. If you can just turn on your goblins with haste, putting the Chieftain into play and then turn them all sideways. If you haven't gone to attacks yet, that is another way to win. And this can happen as early as turn 2, because you can put the Food Chain into play off of, say, a Taiga and an Ancient Tomb, and then cast a Fury, which will allow you, while the trigger is still on the stack, to exile that for 6 mana and immediately turn it into a Muxus. So this deck can go off very quickly out of nowhere if your opponent isn't ready for it. On the right side of the board, you have Fred piloting Cephalid Breakfast. This is a combo deck that is based off of the interaction of Cephalid Illusionist with one of 2 other cards in the deck. You can either use the Nomad's Encore, which has a 0 ability that can target the Cephalid Illusionist repeatedly, or the Shuko, which you can equip repeatedly for 0. Milling the entire library with the Cephalid Illusionist's triggered ability, and eventually that will put 3 Narcomoeba into the graveyard, which will allow you to dread return, sacrificing your Narcomoebas into a Thassa's Oracle, which just wins you the game. It says it right there on the card. This deck has a little bit of staying power early game if it can't immediately activate its combo with the Baleful Strix, kind of blocking any kind of early aggro strategy with the Death Touch and being able to replace itself. And then, of course, it runs the Teferi Time Raveler, so basically says that nobody gets to interact during my turn. This deck also has the backup plan of the Stoneforge Mystic. Not only can it find the Shuko, it can also find Cauldron Complete, which can win the game on its own in 4 turns. Now that we're a little bit more familiar with the decks, let's go ahead and get this started. Going down to 6, Fred is on the play here, starting with a Ponder, looking at that top 3 cards. And getting that important card selection here. On the other side of the board, I'm starting with a Goblin Lackey. Very good card to have in play turn 1. Fred recognizes this, spends his Brainstorm to use that Force of Will on my turn 1 to get Goblin Lackey out of there. Recognizes the strength in that card and not really having a lot of ways to deal with it. Just doesn't want to think about it. Fred using his turn 2 to go and get that Stoneforge Mystic, which is going to fetch up. He's decided to get the Cauldron Complete, kind of signaling to me that he is not looking for the combo right now. He's looking for the beatdown plan. So just an Ignoble Hierarch, which is going to ramp a little bit of mana. And we're seeing an Urza's Saga on 1 come into play on Fred's side, crashing in with that Cauldron Complete, down to 15 already. 2 mana is going to get a Runevelt Hordemaster, which is going to pump all of the goblins. It's a Goblin Lord and allows them to basically grow, or you can exile cards off the top of your library whenever a goblin dies. Now, this is interesting because we see a Conspicuous Snoop come into play here, showing Kiki-Jiki off the top of the library. A lot of thinking going on here, because during upkeep, before draw, we can make an almost infinite number of tapped Conspicuous Snoops. Trying to think what we're going to do with this. Fred, recognizing that threat, uses this Brainstorm here, knowing that either the Snoop has to be dealt with right now, or something else dramatic has to happen. So puts his cards thusly. Is set up to make an Urza Saga token construct if he'd like. Would just be a 2/2. Decides to turn it sideways, crash back in, down to 10. And we see a Nomads enter play. Without the Cephalid Illusionist, though, this is just a kind of a not great 1/1, but it is very difficult to get rid of. So telling Fred that I am activating the Snoop during upkeep, counting how many cards I have played, because at this point, wondering how many cards I can exile off the top of my deck with the Runeveld Hordemaster at the end of this turn. And with the final copy, making a copy of the Ignoble Hierarch for a little bit of extra mana. Draws Kiki-Jiki, and very, very unlikely, but we see the Sling Gang Lieutenant come off the top, which allows me to win the game right there, exiling or just sacrificing those 40 tokens and draining Fred for his life total. So off to game 2 we are a-going. We see Goblin Lackey come down on turn 1, Fred having the Swords to Plowshares for it this time. 2 mana on Fred's turn 2 is going to get Stoneforge Mystic, and he's going to show Kaldra again. So either has Shuko in hand or doesn't need it at the moment. Seeing a turn 2 Goblin Lackey. And Fred kind of deciding what he's going to do here. Either holding up that Kaldra or maybe crashing in. He knows that I probably won't block it. So that would be opening himself up to a Goblin Lackey trigger. We're seeing an Ancient Tomb come down, being able to tap for that double colorless. Trying to decide what's going to happen here, very much in the tank. 3 mana is going to get a Goblin Matron. Fred allows that to resolve. Going to go find any Goblin. Also cracking the Wooded Foothills while I'm in there. Getting a Taiga, casting the Ignoble and attacking for 2. And Fred responds very intelligently by putting the Kaldra into play and exiling the Goblin Lackey. A little bit of a misplay on my part, at least. Now Fred in a pretty good position here. Has his Kaldra in play. Has the Baleful Strix now as a fantastic blocker. And Shuko can come down at any time too with the Stoneforge Mystic active. So there's always the potential that Stoneforge is activated, putting Shuko into play at the end of one of my turns. And Cephalid Illusionist shows up next turn, and the game is over. We're going to see a Cabal Therapy naming. I can't remember what he names here, but it's not in my hand. So he decides to sacrifice the Baleful Strix to name the Goblin Ringleader. So Cabal Therapy being able to flash back by sacrificing a creature. And crashing in. Forgetting what life totals are, just counting them up, making sure that I had paid life for that last Ancient Tomb. Playing a Food Chain. Now trying to decide if I can get there, basically. So that's going to generate 1 mana, and then it's going to generate itself into 2 mana. Food Chain making enough mana for creature spells. And that's going to generate into the Sling Gang Lieutenant, which is going to be exiled for 5 mana. It does leave behind 2 tokens. Getting Kiki-Jiki, copying a Goblin Matron, getting Muxus with the copied Goblin Matron. The token itself does have the same CMC as the card that it was cloned. So 6 mana is going to see Muxus come into play, finding a Goblin Matron, a Conspicuous Snoop, and a Goblin Lackey. Seeing the top card of the library before the Goblin Matron trigger goes off, decides to get a second Muxus Goblin Grandee. No Goblin on top, exiling the Muxus in play to cast Muxus. A big Whifferino there. Only one creature is going to come into play here. It's going to be the Munitions Expert, which is going to deal X damage, where X is the number of goblins you have, to a creature or planeswalker. Casting the second Sling Gang Lieutenant off the top of the library, and then showing a Surgical Extraction off the top. So out of gas and have to pass turn. None of these goblins can attack this turn. So Fred is staring down a pretty intense board state here. He knows that if I go to untaps, things can be really bad. He could technically still win here. He's going for 3 mana. 3 mana is going to get Teferi Time Raveler in play. So he gets to bounce a creature, enchantment, or artifact to owner's hand to draw a card. So he's going to bounce Food Chain here. Cast that Brainstorm with his last mana, and then he's going to concede, and that will be the game. So for that round, it looked like Cephalid Breakfast was kind of trying to win through the beatdown method of Cauldron Complete, but Goblins was able to combo out both games, leading to a 2-0 Goblins. Thanks for stopping by and checking out our videos here at Tuesday Night Legacy. We always appreciate a new view. And if you are here for the first time, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel to stay up to date on all of our cool stuff. Thanks as always to Spellhold Games for allowing us to play at their store and allowing us to set up all of our recording equipment there. It allows the channel to continue. And if you guys are interested in either of these deck lists, they are always in the description of this video, but they are also found on our Instagram. That visual deck list that I used at the beginning of the video is over there on Instagram, so check it out. And that's going to do it for us for today. As always, I am Eugene, and this is Tuesday Night Legacy. We'll see you next time.